All right, boys and girls, we're going to take some notes today over benchmark fractions. Um, first of all, um, just to tell you again what's going on. So, I am out because I was exposed to COVID. I do not have COVID, but I'm just in kind of a quarantine right now for so many days until I can come back and it's safe for everybody. And so hopefully that will be next week. But until then, we're just going to have to make things work as best we can. And so we'll have some days where I'm going to send you some videos and we're going to look at some different things that are new topics like this one here. And so I've been telling you guys for a while that we were going to get into fractions after Thanksgiving break. And so this is kind of officially where we're going to start seeing some fractions that you guys, have seen the last couple of years and will look more like traditional fractions. The skills that we were doing before Thanksgiving break definitely will come back into play though. So factoring and greatest common factor and prime and composite numbers, those things will definitely come into play this week. So what you could do on this video is just kind of follow me. You're just going to take the notes just like you would take them in class. And so here I'm on my table of contents. And as you could tell right there at the bottom, I have the date 12/1. And I also have the title of this next lesson, which is called Benchmark Fractions. And so go ahead and copy that. And whoever the sub might be will, can pause this and restart it as many times as needed so you guys can get caught up. So benchmark fractions is going to be the title of this particular lesson today, and it will be over your next assignment. You'll have an assignment over benchmark fractions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip to my next blank page so you guys can do the same thing. And at the top of that particular page, go ahead and write benchmark fractions. All right, I'll let you guys do that. Okay, so as you're writing benchmark fractions, what I'd like to do first is I'd like to go back and kind of just talk about some general fraction terminology, general vocabulary that you guys should know by the time you're fifth graders. It has been a while since you've done anything with fractions, and so some of this stuff has probably left your mind. And so we're going to talk about some just general fraction knowledge before we get to what are called benchmark fractions. So let's start with just the word fraction. And let's think about what a fraction is. So this would be the conversation I would have if I was with you in class. I would probably ask you guys for your opinion. What do you think a fraction is? And I'd let a few of you answer and come up with what you already know about fractions. And some of the answers I would be looking for would be things like, okay, a fraction is part of a whole. Which to me, it just, that right there describes everything. So let's put part of a whole next to it. Okay, and so that's pretty basic. Again, that's something that I would feel like by fifth grade you should have been taught already, that a fraction is a part, or it's a piece of a whole number. And so when we're thinking about fractions and we're learning about fractions, a big part of this is going to come back into play with kind of something we've already done this year, which we've done a ton already with decimals. And so, back when we started decimals, that was the conversation we had about decimals, that decimals and fractions are pretty much the same thing. They are part, they're a piece of a whole, or they're part or a piece of something. For you guys, when we start fractions up, I always like to kind of just start basic with just, well, what is it? So it's a part or it's a piece. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to write a few things. I'm going to go ahead and write what looks kind of like, or draw what looks like a fraction bar. And so I'm going to write the word part. And then underneath, I'm going to write the word whole. Next to it, I'm going to write the word N, or excuse me, write the letter N, and then underneath the letter D. And then a couple of words here that you guys should know. Numerator over denominator. All right, and I'll give you guys some a chance there to get caught up and to copy those. All right, so pretty much nothing's new at this point. Everything that you're seeing on this page, you should recognize. You should recognize that a fraction is part of a whole. You should recognize the words numerator and denominator. You should know that the numerator is on top, so that is your part. Your denominator is your whole, and so that is however many pieces the fraction is broken up into, or the whole is broken up into, I should say. And so just very, very, very basic fraction knowledge. Something else that I want you guys to realize, and you can draw this, is just kind of like a basic number line. A lot of times I go up to the front of the room and we talk about my number line that's up on my wall. And it's so important for kids to understand, or for you guys to understand, that when you're talking about fractions, you're talking about fractional pieces that exist in between 0 and 1. And so really all your fractions, so I'll write the word fractions again, exist somewhere in between 0 and 1. And so it's almost like if we're going to draw this out like in a number line, I can now go up to my number line and I can think, okay, if I were to say a fraction, and here's a pretty basic one that we're going to talk about today, like the fraction half. The fraction half would go somewhere in between 0 and 1. Versus maybe the fraction 4/5. 4/5 would go maybe a little bit closer to 1, because 4/5 is greater than a half, and it's a little bit closer to a whole. Versus something like maybe 1/20. 1/20 is barely anything. It is very close to 0. And it's something. I mean, it is a fractional piece. But since it's 1/20, then that's going to exist closer to 0. And so just to kind of get that general feel for, okay, if a fraction pops up and we're talking about a fraction, you have to have that knowledge to go, okay, it is somewhere between 0 and 1 on the number line. So we are talking about very, very small, very teeny tiny fractions here. We're talking about something that exists between 0 and 1. Kids always want to think about numbers sometimes, and they think, well, hey, the number 3 is a really low number. Yeah, the number 3 is really low, but we're talking about something even smaller than that. So really, really small fractions and numbers that we're going to be dealing with over the next several months. And that's why I explained at the beginning of the year, in 5th grade, we really don't go really high with numbers. We don't go into the millions and billions a lot. We really kind of focus on parts and pieces. So a big part of our year is what we're about to get into, which are fractions. Okay, so kind of just some general review over fractions. And like I said, everything so far should be, okay, yeah, Mr. McClure, I know that. That's not that big a deal. Okay, this part here, I'm going to put a squiggly line to separate, and I'm going to come down. I'm going to put a star first, and then I'm going to write really what we're going to get into now, which are benchmark fractions. So I'm going to write benchmark fractions. You guys can do the same. Think of it like this. If it's on my page today, it needs to be on your page. So benchmark fractions, go ahead and write that. And let's kind of stop and talk a little bit about what benchmark fractions are. We've already talked about benchmark numbers earlier this year. It was really quick. We didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I know you guys will know this one. If you pay attention to my class, you'll know this one. A lot of times I always stop and talk about the number 25 if it pops up on a question, and I'll relate it back to money. And I think the ones that listen and pay attention to my class are going, okay, yeah, I know what he's talking about. You know, a lot of times I'll relate it back to quarters. Well, the number 25 is a benchmark number. The number 50 would be a benchmark number. The number 75 would be a benchmark number. So basically, I'm calling out quarters here. Well, benchmark numbers are numbers that are very easy to work in your head. A lot of times you would think about mental math with benchmark numbers. You might think about friendly numbers like your tens. Your tens could be benchmark numbers, or your fives could be benchmark numbers for that matter. And so they're really easy numbers to use. Well, benchmark fractions really are the same thing. They are fractions that pop up quite a bit, whether it be in a math class or out in the real world. And they are just friendly fractions that are easy to use, to add or subtract. They're easy to think about. They're easy to visualize. And so we're going to talk about some benchmark fractions today. And like I said, this is going to be a lesson that you're going to have.